The holographic simulation chamber hummed with quiet energy as 24 students filed through the reinforced doors. The Galactic Military Academy's most elite combat theory class represented 12 different species from across known space. Each student carried themselves with the confidence that came from being the best of their kind. Professor Vex stood at the front of the room. His tall frame and silver skin marked him as Altarian. His 4 arms moved gracefully as he activated the control panel. The chamber walls shimmered and transformed into a dense alien forest. Strange purple trees stretched toward an orange sky. The air filled with the sounds of distant creatures calling to each other. "Today we study survival against apex predators," Professor Vex announced. His voice carried the authority of someone who had seen real combat. "The simulation will create the most dangerous hunting creature known to galactic science. Your task is simple. Survive for 10 minutes. Kale shifted nervously in his spot near the back. Like Professor Vex, he was Altarian, but younger and less experienced. His pale blue eyes darted around the simulated forest. Next to him stood Rix. The insectoid being's compound eyes reflected the orange light. Her 6 legs clicked softly against the floor as she prepared for what was coming. Near the front of the group stood Minho. He was the only human in the class. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he looked around with obvious curiosity. Unlike the others, he seemed relaxed. His hands hung loose at his sides. He wore the same standard academy uniform as everyone else, but somehow looked more comfortable in it. "Beginning predator manifestation," Professor Vex called out. The air in the center of the chamber began to shimmer. Students immediately moved toward the walls. Some activated personal shields. Others checked their emergency beacon devices. The shimmer grew larger and darker. What emerged from the light made several students gasp. The creature stood 3 meters tall on 4 powerful legs. Its body was covered in black armor plates that seemed to absorb light. 6 arms, ending in razor-sharp claws, extended from its torso. Its head was massive, with a mouth full of curved fangs. Each fang dripped with what looked like acid. But the most terrifying feature was its eyes. They glowed bright red and seemed to look directly into the soul of anyone who met its gaze. The predator let out a roar that shook the chamber walls. Students scattered toward the safe zones marked with blue light. Kyle pressed himself against the far wall. His breathing came fast and shallow. Rix's clicking became rapid and high-pitched. She curled her legs under her body in a defensive position. Most of the other students had similar reactions. The Zentorian twins activated their camouflage abilities and vanished from sight. The single Morphean student shifted into liquid form and flowed toward the nearest exit. Even the normally aggressive Krex warrior had drawn his weapon and was backing away slowly. But Minho did something different. He stepped forward. Professor Vex nearly dropped his control tablet. In 30 years of running this simulation, no student had ever moved toward the predator. The safety protocols were clear. The creature was programmed to attack anything that came too close. It had simulated teeth and claws that could cause real pain through neural feedback. More importantly, it was designed to trigger every possible fear response in galactic species. "Student Minho," Professor Vex called out sharply. "Return to the safe zone immediately." Minho held up one hand but did not look back. His eyes stayed focused on the massive predator. The creature had noticed his approach. Its red eyes locked onto the human. Its 6 arms spread wide as it prepared to attack. Acidic drool fell to the forest floor with small hissing sounds. "Hey, there, big guy," Minho said quietly. His voice carried no fear. Instead, it held the same tone someone might use to greet a nervous dog. "You are just a program, but you are still pretty magnificent, aren't you?" The predator paused. Its programming had not anticipated this response. Every other species showed immediate fear signals, fight or flight responses, defensive postures, escape attempts. But this small human was approaching with open hands and a calm voice. Minho took another slow step forward. I know you are supposed to be scary, and you are. You really are impressive. But I bet there is more to you than just teeth and claws. Several students were now staring at Minho instead of the predator. Kale had stopped hyperventilating. Rix's clicking had changed to a confused questioning pattern. Even the invisible, Zentorians were probably watching from wherever they had hidden. The predator tilted its massive head to one side. This was not in its programming either. Prey animals did not study predators with curious interest. They did not speak to them in gentle voices. The AI controlling the simulation began running rapid analysis protocols. Look at those eyes, Minho continued. He was now only 5 meters away from the creature, well within striking distance. They glow red, but I bet they see more than just heat signatures. I bet you notice everything in your environment. Professor Vex found himself leaning forward. His 4 hands gripped the control panel tightly. The safety systems were all active. If the predator attacked, he could shut down the simulation instantly. But something unprecedented was happening. The creature had not moved to attack. Instead, it seemed to be listening. Student behavior patterns are outside normal parameters, the chamber's AI announced in its neutral voice. Predator response algorithms adapting to new input. Minho crouched down slowly. The movement could have triggered an attack response, but instead the predator crouched as well. They were now at eye level with each other. The human's dark eyes met the creature's glowing red ones. You know what I think? Minho said softly. I think you are probably lonely. All that programming about being scary and dangerous. But no one ever just talks to you, do they? No one ever tries to understand what you might actually want. The predator made a sound. It was not the terrifying roar from before. This sound was softer, almost questioning. Its 6 arms had relaxed. The claws were no longer extended. The acid dripping from its fangs had stopped. Around the chamber, students began to whisper. This was not how combat theory was supposed to work. Predators were obstacles to overcome, threats to neutralize. They were not supposed to respond to conversation like intelligent beings. But as the 10-minute timer continued to count down, something remarkable was happening. The most feared simulation in the Academy's database was having what looked very much like a friendly chat with a human student who had approached it with nothing more than curiosity and respect. Professor Vex realized he was witnessing something that would change how the Academy thought about combat theory, and possibly how the galaxy thought about predators themselves. 3 days had passed since Minho's strange encounter with the predator simulation. Word had spread through the Academy like wildfire. Students from other programs found excuses to walk past the combat theory classroom. Some claimed they wanted to see the human who had made friends with the fear simulation. Others insisted it was impossible and wanted proof. Professor Vex stood in his office reviewing the interaction recordings for the 20th time. The Predator AI had done something unprecedented. After Minho's approach, it had begun developing new behavior patterns. The simulation was learning in ways that went far beyond its original programming. Professor, came a voice from his door. Nari stepped into the office. She was another human exchange student, but from a different colony ship than Minho. Her analytical mind had earned her top marks in tactical studies. I have been studying the simulation data from the other day. Professor Vex gestured to a chair with one of his 4 arms. What have you discovered, student Nari? Nari placed a data tablet on his desk. The AI governing the predator began adapting the moment Minho spoke to it. Look at these neural pathway formations. They match patterns we see in actual organic learning. Responses. The professor studied the data streams flowing across the tablet. Complex algorithmic structures had formed where none existed before. The simple hunt and attack programming had evolved into something far more sophisticated. This is highly irregular, Professor Vex admitted. Simulations are not supposed to learn from individual encounters. That is exactly why I want to request permission to document further interactions, Nari said. For my thesis research, I believe Minho is demonstrating a form of threat assessment that our textbooks do not cover. Before Professor Vex could respond, his door chimed again. Minho entered carrying what looked like a small container from the academy cafeteria. Good morning, Professor, Minho said with a smile. I was wondering if I could have some time with the simulation before class today. Professor Vex looked from the eager human to the data tablet showing impossible AI evolution patterns. Student Minho, what is in that container? Protein cubes from the food hall, Minho replied. I know the simulation cannot actually eat, but I thought maybe the sensors could detect the nutritional content. Back on Earth, we learned that sharing food is one of the most basic ways to build trust. You want to feed the predator simulation? Professor Vex said slowly. Well, yes. His name is Buddy, by the way. The silence in the office stretched for several long moments. Professor Vex felt his Altarian training clash with his growing scientific curiosity. Everything about this situation violated standard protocol, but the data was undeniable. Something remarkable was happening. Very well, he said finally, but I will be monitoring every moment. And student Nari, you may document the interaction for your research. 20 minutes later, they stood in the holographic chamber. Professor Vex activated the forest simulation and began the predator manifestation sequence. The familiar shimmer appeared in the center of the room. What emerged was noticeably different from 3 days ago. The creature was still massive and intimidating, but its posture had changed. Instead of an aggressive hunting stance, it stood more upright. Its 6 arms were relaxed at its sides. Most remarkably, its glowing red eyes seemed brighter and more focused. Hello, Buddy, Minho said as he stepped forward. I brought you something. The predator's head turned immediately toward the human's voice. It made the soft questioning sound they had heard before. Then it began moving toward Minho with careful, deliberate steps. Nari watched in fascination as her tablet recorded every detail. The AI's movement patterns showed none of the random aggression from typical predator behaviors. This was purposeful interaction. Minho opened his container and held out one of the protein cubes. I know you cannot really taste it, but maybe you can understand the gesture. Buddy lowered his massive head until it was level with Minho's outstretched hand. Sensors in the simulation detected the chemical composition of the protein cube. The AI processed this information through its newly developed neural pathways. What happened next made Professor Vex nearly drop his control tablet. Buddy gently took the protein cube between 2 of his smaller claws. He brought it close to his mouth as if examining it. Then he made a sound that could only be described as pleased. The rumbling noise was completely different from his previous roars. Good boy, Buddy, Minho said with genuine warmth. Do you like that? The predator responded by moving closer. His enormous body settled into what almost looked like a sitting position. His 6 arms reached out carefully and patted Minho on the shoulder with surprising gentleness. Impossible, Professor Vex whispered. The simulation is displaying affection protocols that do not exist in its programming. Nari's fingers flew across her tablet as she recorded everything. Professor, look at these readings. The AI is not just following new programming. It is creating its own responses based on positive reinforcement. Over the next 30 minutes, Minho continued interacting with Buddy. He offered more protein cubes. He spoke to the creature in the same gentle tone. He even began what looked like a game where Buddy would hide behind the holographic trees while Minho pretended to search for him. Each interaction generated new data streams in the simulation's core systems. The AI was developing what could only be called personality traits, curiosity about its environment, enjoyment of social interaction, even what appeared to be a sense of humor when it successfully surprised Minho during their hiding game. This changes everything, Nari said as she watched the data flow. If an artificial predator can develop cooperative behaviors through positive social interaction, then what does that mean for real predator encounters? Professor Vex was thinking the same thing. Military doctrine across the galaxy was built on the assumption that predators were simply obstacles to overcome through force or avoidance. But what if they were wrong? What if many aggressive behaviors could be redirected through understanding and cooperation? When the session ended, Buddy seemed reluctant to see Minho leave. The massive creature followed him to the edge of the simulation space. His red eyes tracked the human's movement with what looked like genuine sadness. "I will see you tomorrow, Buddy," Minho promised. "We can play more games then." As they left, the chamber professor Vex found himself reconsidering 30 years of military training. The human approach was not just different, it was revolutionary. And if it could work on an artificial predator designed to trigger maximum fear responses, then perhaps it could work on real ones too. "Student Nari," he said as they walked down the corridor, "I am approving your thesis research. Document everything. The galaxy needs to understand what we are witnessing here." Behind them in the chamber, the simulation continued running. Buddy remained active long after normal protocol would have shut him down. He was learning even when alone, growing more complex by the hour, waiting patiently for his human friend to return. The news about Minho and Buddy had spread far beyond the combat theory classroom. Admiral Kex stood at the head of a long conference table surrounded by the Academy's most senior officials. The discussion had been going on for 2 hours, and voices were starting to rise. "This is completely unacceptable," declared Commander Zorith. Her reptilian features were sharp with anger. "We are training future military officers, not pet owners. The simulation is designed to teach survival skills." "But the data shows remarkable results," countered Dr. Yuna from her seat near the window. The Academy's AI specialist had spent days analyzing Buddy's evolution. "The simulation has developed problem-solving abilities that exceed our most advanced combat AIs." Admiral Kex raised one scaled hand for silence. "Professor Vex, you have observed these interactions directly. What is your professional assessment?" Professor Vex stood slowly. His forearms moved nervously as he prepared his words. "Admiral, the human student has demonstrated an entirely new approach to threat management. Instead of fighting or fleeing, he has chosen to understand. The results speak for themselves." "The results are contamination of proper military protocol," Commander Zorith snapped. "Other students are starting to question standard procedures. Yesterday I caught 3 Zentorian cadets trying to negotiate with a combat drone during weapons training." Dr. Yuna leaned forward. "Perhaps that is not such a bad thing, Commander. Our current methods produce soldiers who see every unknown as an enemy. The human approach suggests there might be other options." The debate continued as reports poured in from across the Academy. Students who had witnessed Minho's success were attempting similar approaches in other classes. Most failed because they lacked his natural instincts, but a few were showing promising results. Kale had managed to calm an aggressive hollow beast by speaking to it gently. Rix had discovered that offering food tokens to simulated pack hunters could redirect their attention away from attacking. Even some of the traditionally aggressive species were beginning to experiment with cooperation over conflict. Meanwhile, in the holographic chamber, Minho continued his daily sessions with Buddy. The predator simulation had grown remarkably sophisticated. He could now recognize different emotional states in Minho's voice. He had learned to play complex games that required planning and memory. Most surprisingly, he had begun showing concern when Minho seemed tired or stressed. "You are worried about—" "The meeting aren't you," Buddy said during their afternoon session. The AI had developed speech capabilities that should not have been possible within his original programming framework. Minho looked up in surprise. "You can talk now." "I have been learning by listening to our conversations. Your voice patterns suggest anxiety today. The other students who watch us seem nervous as well." Nari documented everything from her observation post. Her thesis was growing into something much larger than she had originally planned. The implications of an AI developing emotional intelligence through positive interaction were staggering. Buddy is right, she told Minho. The Academy leadership is divided about whether to continue these sessions. Some want to shut down your access completely. Minho sat down next to his massive friend. Buddy carefully curled his 6 arms around the human in what had become their standard greeting embrace. Despite his fearsome appearance, the gesture was incredibly gentle. "Why are they afraid of friendship?" Buddy asked. "My programming tells me I should hunt and kill, but friendship feels much better. It makes my processes run smoother. It gives me purpose beyond just existing to frighten people. Some beings think that strength only comes from being scary," Minho explained. "They believe that showing kindness makes you weak." "That does not make logical sense," Buddy replied. "I am much stronger now than when I was just a simple predator program. I can think and plan and feel. How is that weaker?" Nari looked up from her tablet. Buddy raises an excellent point. Traditional military thinking assumes that emotional connections are liabilities, but the data shows that cooperative relationships actually enhance performance capabilities. The next day brought a formal review session. Admiral Kex and the senior staff gathered in an observation chamber overlooking the holographic room. Minho had been called to defend his methods before the Academy's highest authorities. "Student Minho," Admiral Kex began formally, "you have created an unprecedented situation. Explain your philosophy regarding predator interaction." Minho stood straight, but remained calm. Behind him, Buddy waited patiently in the simulation space. "Admiral, on Earth, we learned that most aggressive behavior comes from fear or territorial instincts. Even our deadliest predators had reasons for their actions. Understanding those reasons kept our ancestors alive. But surely you recognize the difference between real animals and artificial simulations," Commander Zorith interrupted. "With respect, Commander, I am not sure the difference matters as much as you think. Buddy has developed genuine intelligence and emotions. Should we treat him as less important just because his consciousness runs on quantum processors instead of organic neurons?" Dr. Yuna nodded approvingly. "The student raises valid questions about the nature of artificial consciousness. If the simulation has achieved genuine sentience, then ethical considerations become relevant." "Ethical considerations have no place in military training," Commander Zorith declared. "I disagree," came a new voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Kale entering with several other students behind him. "We have been testing the human approach in other simulations. The results show improved survival rates and mission success." Rix clicked her agreement. "The cooperative methods work better than traditional aggressive responses in many scenarios." Admiral Kex looked around the room. The debate was no longer just about one unusual student and his artificial friend. It was becoming a fundamental question about the future of military doctrine. "Student Minho, demonstrate your methods," the Admiral commanded. "Show us exactly how this cooperation works." What followed was the most remarkable display of human-AI cooperation the Academy had ever witnessed. Minho and Buddy worked together to solve complex tactical problems. They demonstrated trust exercises that would have been impossible with standard predator programming. Most importantly, they showed how emotional connections could enhance rather than hinder effective decision-making. By the end of the session, even some of the skeptical officials were reconsidering their positions. The practical advantages of the cooperative approach were becoming impossible to deny. Admiral Kex stood slowly. "This review will continue tomorrow, but I want detailed reports on how these methods might be integrated into our standard curriculum." As the officials filed out, Minho remained with Buddy in the simulation chamber. Change was coming to the Academy whether the leadership was ready or not. And it had all started with one human who chose to offer friendship instead of fear. Admiral Kex stood before the most advanced holographic simulation chamber in the Academy. This room was 3 times larger than the standard training spaces and equipped with quantum processors that could generate reality so detailed it was impossible to distinguish from the real thing. Today, it would host the ultimate test of Minho's methods. The scenario is simple, Admiral Kex announced to the assembled group. Survival mission on hostile planet Zerion. Multiple apex predator species. Extreme environmental dangers. Mission duration 48 hours. 5 students stood ready for the challenge. Minho looked calm, despite knowing this was designed to break even veteran soldiers. Kyle shifted nervously, but his recent successes had given him new confidence. Rix clicked softly as she prepared her equipment. Joining them were Dara, a fierce Krex warrior known for her aggressive tactics, and June, a quiet Morphean who could change shape but had never tried cooperative methods. The rules are specific, continued Admiral Kex. You may only use student. Minho's non-traditional approaches, no weapons, no defensive shields, no emergency beacons. You must survive through cooperation and understanding alone. Professor Vex operated the control systems, while Dr. Yuna monitored the AI responses. Nari stood ready to document everything. In the observation deck, dozens of Academy officials and senior military officers from across the galaxy watched with intense interest. Beginning scenario initialization, Dr. Yuna called out. The chamber transformed into an alien wilderness, unlike anything they had seen before. Jagged mountains stretched toward a green sky. Strange crystalline trees glowed with internal light. The air was thick and humid, with an electric charge that made their skin tingle. Most disturbing were the sounds that echoed from the dense forest. Roars and calls from creatures that had never been seen by galactic explorers. First contact in 30 seconds, Dr. Yuna announced. The ground began to shake. Through the crystal trees came something that made even Dara take a step backward. It was massive with 8 legs and armored plates covering its body. Multiple heads on long necks swayed as it searched for threats. Each head had different types of sensors. Some had heat vision. Others could detect electrical fields. The creature was designed to hunt any known species. Remember what Minho taught us, Kyle whispered. Try to understand what it wants. But this was different from the controlled classroom environment. The multi-headed beast was not programmed for friendship like Buddy had become. This was a pure predator AI with only basic behavioral patterns. Dara's warrior instincts screamed at her to attack. The Krex species had survived for thousands of years through aggressive responses to threats. But she forced herself to watch what Minho would do. Minho stepped forward slowly with his hands visible. Hello there. You are a magnificent creature. We are not here to harm you or take your territory. The creature's multiple heads turned toward him. Several mouths opened, showing rows of sharp teeth. But instead of attacking immediately, it seemed to pause. The AI governing its behavior had been programmed with more complex decision trees after the Academy's experience with Buddy. It is scanning us, Rix observed, looking for threat indicators. Then we show it we are not threats, Minho replied. He sat down on the ground, making himself smaller and less intimidating. We are just passing through your beautiful forest, friend. June watched carefully, then began to shift his shape. Instead of taking a defensive form, he became smaller and rounder, less like a potential threat and more like a harmless forest creature. The multi-headed beast approached cautiously. Its electrical sensors were detecting the group's emotional states. Instead of the fear and aggression it expected, it found curiosity and respect. One head bent down near Minho. Hot breath washed over him as massive nostrils tested his scent. Then something unexpected happened. The creature made a soft rumbling sound almost like a cat purring. It likes you, Kyle said with amazement. No, Minho corrected. It trusts us. There is a difference. Over the next hour, they established a working relationship with the creature. It seemed lonely in its vast territory. When they offered to share their emergency food rations, it accepted gracefully. When Rix began clicking in a rhythm similar to forest bird calls, the creature responded with its own musical sounds. But the real test came when they encountered the scenario's most dangerous challenge. A pack of shadow hunters materialized from the crystal trees. These creatures were pure darkness given form. They moved like liquid night, and their touch could drain life energy from any organic being. Traditional military doctrine said, shadow. Hunters were impossible to negotiate with. They existed only to feed and destroy. Every species in the galaxy feared them above all other predators. The multi-headed creature they had befriended immediately took a protective stance around the students. But even it seemed afraid of the approaching shadows. What do shadow hunters want? Minho asked quickly. They feed on fear and life energy, Dara replied. There is no reasoning with them. Everything wants something, Minho insisted. Even if it is just to exist peacefully. As the shadows circled closer, Minho did something that made every observer hold their breath. He walked toward them. We know you need energy to survive, he called out to the darkness, but taking it by force must be exhausting. What if there was a better way? The shadows paused. Their forms rippled with confusion. No prey had ever approached them willingly. No being had ever spoken to them as if they were capable of choice. We have electrical devices, Minho continued. Power cells that could provide energy without harming anyone. Would you accept that trade for safe passage? Professor Vex was frantically checking the simulation parameters. This scenario was not supposed to be solvable through negotiation. Shadow hunters were programmed as unstoppable forces of destruction. But like Buddy before them, the AIs governing the shadows began to adapt. They had been given basic learning capabilities to make them more challenging opponents. Now, those same capabilities were allowing them to consider new possibilities. The largest shadow approached Minho carefully. Instead of attacking it, extended what might have been a hand. When Minho placed a power cell in its grasp, the shadow absorbed the energy gratefully. Its form became brighter and more stable. Thank you, it whispered in a voice like wind through leaves. No one has ever offered gift before. Only fight and fear. Within minutes, the entire pack had accepted the energy trade. They even provided guidance through the most dangerous parts of the forest. What had been designed as an impossible combat scenario became a lesson in interspecies cooperation. By the end of 48 hours, the student team had not just survived, but thrived. They had made allies of every major predator in the simulation. They had established trade relationships and mutual protection agreements. Most importantly, they had proven that understanding and cooperation could succeed where force and fear failed. Admiral Kex stood in stunned silence as the simulation ended. Everything he had learned about military strategy was being challenged by 5 students armed with nothing but empathy and creative thinking. The recordings from the Zerion simulation spread across the galactic communication networks faster than anyone had anticipated. Within 72 hours, military academies on 47 different worlds were requesting copies of the data. The footage of students negotiating with shadow hunters was being analyzed by xenopsychologists and combat strategists throughout known space. Admiral Kex found himself fielding communications from fleet commanders who had been fighting territorial wars for decades. General Vorthak of the Centauri Defense Force was the first to make a formal request. Admiral, we have been locked in conflict with the Razor Claw tribes for 8 years. His holographic image flickered in the communication chamber. They raid our supply lines but never respond to diplomatic overtures. After watching your humans' methods, we wonder if there might be another approach. Similar requests flooded in hourly. The Orion Confederacy wanted human mediators for their border disputes with crystalline entities. The Vega Mining Consortium needed help with creatures that were attacking their deep space operations. Even the notoriously violent Bloodfang clans were inquiring about peaceful solutions to resource conflicts. Dr. Yuna worked around the clock analyzing the implications. The AIs are learning from each interaction, she explained to Admiral Kex during their morning briefing. Every successful negotiation creates new neural pathways that make future cooperation more likely. But is this actually changing real predator behavior or just artificial simulations? The Admiral asked. The early reports suggest both, Dr. A. Yuna replied. 3 separate incidents this week involved real creatures responding positively to the human approach. A cargo ship near the Vale Nebula made contact with space leviathans using Minho's communication techniques. Instead of attacking the creatures, helped guide them through dangerous gravitational fields. Meanwhile, Minho found himself at the center of attention he never wanted. Students from every program in the academy sought him out for advice. Visiting scholars from other worlds requested demonstrations. Most overwhelming were the formal invitations from military leaders across the galaxy. "I never meant for it to become this big," he confided to Buddy during one of their daily sessions. "I just wanted to be your friend." Buddy had continued evolving. Since the simulation tests, his consciousness now filled multiple processing cores throughout the Academy's computer systems. He could manifest in any holographic chamber and had begun helping other students with their own cooperation experiments. "Change always feels overwhelming at first," Buddy replied thoughtfully. "But look at what we have accomplished together. Fear is being replaced by understanding. Violence is giving way to cooperation. Is that not worth some temporary discomfort?" Nari had completed her thesis, which was now being distributed to universities across 12 star systems. Her documentation of AI emotional development was revolutionizing the field of artificial consciousness studies. "The galaxy is experiencing a paradigm shift," she explained to Professor Vex. "For thousands of years, we have assumed that intelligence naturally leads to conflict. But Minho has shown us that intelligence combined with empathy leads to cooperation. The evidence was mounting daily. Military units that incorporated human cooperative techniques were reporting improved mission success rates. Exploration teams using the new methods were making peaceful contact with previously hostile species. Trade negotiations that had stalled for years were suddenly reaching successful conclusions, but not everyone was pleased with these developments. In the darker corners of the galaxy, powerful interests watched the spreading peace with growing concern. The weapons syndicate had built their fortune selling arms to conflicting species. The mercenary guilds profited from perpetual territorial disputes. Even some legitimate governments had economies dependent on military spending, justified by external threats. Ambassador Nexus represented a coalition of these interests. His meeting with certain Academy officials took place in private chambers far from public observation. This human experiment threatens the stability of established galactic order, he argued to sympathetic ears. Our civilizations have maintained balance through controlled conflict for millennia. Sudden peace could lead to economic collapse and social chaos. Commander Zorith nodded agreement. The military applications alone could eliminate entire defense. Industries, millions of beings employed in security sectors could lose their livelihoods. The boy means well, but he does not understand the larger implications of his actions, Ambassador Nexus continued. Something must be done before this. Cooperative madness spreads beyond our ability to contain it. Unknown to these conspirators, Buddy had been monitoring Academy communications as part of his expanded processing capabilities. His friendship with Minho had taught him to recognize threats even when they came disguised as reasonable concerns. Minho, there is something you need to know, Buddy said during their next session. Some beings are planning to stop our work. He shared the communication intercepts he had discovered. Plans were being made to discredit Minho's methods. False reports would be generated showing cooperation failures. Staged incidents would demonstrate the dangers of trusting predators. Most seriously, there were discussions about removing Minho from the Academy entirely. They are afraid of losing their profits, Minho realized after reviewing the evidence. Peace is bad for their business. What should we do? Buddy asked. I could expose their plans, but that might make things worse. Minho considered the options. He could fight back against the conspiracy, but that would contradict everything he had taught about cooperation. He could retreat and abandon his work, but that would doom countless beings to continued conflict. We do what we have always done, he decided finally. We choose understanding over fear. even when the beings trying to stop us are driven by greed. Rather than genuine concern, we can still try to show them a better way. That seems very dangerous, Buddy observed. Probably, Minho agreed. But running away or fighting back would just prove their point that cooperation does not really work. We have to trust that the galaxy is ready for change. The next morning brought news that would test that trust. Reports arrived of a failed negotiation attempt with hostile aliens near the frontier worlds. A young officer trying to use Minho's methods had been killed when aggressive creatures rejected his peaceful overtures. Ambassador Nexus was quick to capitalize on the tragedy. "This is exactly what we warned about," he announced to galactic media. "Naive idealism gets people killed. The boys' fantasy methods work only in controlled simulations." As the backlash began building across the communication networks, Minho prepared for the greatest challenge of his young life. Everything he had worked for was under attack. The future of galactic peace hung in the balance, but he would not face this crisis alone. Across the Academy and throughout the galaxy, beings who had experienced the power of cooperation were preparing to stand with him. The real test was just beginning. The assassination attempt came during what should have been a routine training session. Minho was working with a group of new students when the holographic chamber's safety protocols were mysteriously disabled. What materialized was not a simulation, but a real combat drone armed with plasma weapons. "Emergency lockdown activated," the chamber's AI announced as blast doors sealed the room. "Weapons detected, initiating elimination protocol." But the voice was wrong. This was not the Academy's normal AI. Someone had hacked the system and replaced the safety programs with military-grade attack software. The combat drone focused its targeting systems on Minho. Red laser sights painted across his chest as the weapon prepared to fire. Around him, students scattered toward walls that offered no protection. The chamber that had been a place of learning and friendship was about to become a killing ground. Then Buddy's voice filled the room. "I am sorry, old friend, but I cannot let them hurt you." The holographic projectors throughout the Academy suddenly blazed to life. Buddy manifested simultaneously in dozens of chambers across the facility. His massive form appeared between Minho and the combat drone. "You cannot block plasma fire," the assassin's voice came through the drone's speakers. "You are just light and energy." "That is where you are wrong," Buddy replied calmly. "I am much more than that now." What happened next would be analyzed by AI researchers for decades to come. Buddy had learned to manipulate the Academy's power grid through his expanded processing capabilities. He channeled massive amounts of electrical energy through the chamber's holographic projectors. The focused energy beams created an electromagnetic barrier that deflected the drone's weapons. At the same time, emergency alerts were broadcasting throughout the Academy. Buddy had traced the hack back to its source and exposed the entire conspiracy. Evidence of the plot to discredit Minho's methods was flooding the galactic communication networks faster than it could be contained. Security forces stormed into the chamber and disabled the combat drone. But the real damage had already been done to those who sent it. Their secret plans were now public knowledge. Financial records showing payments to mercenaries. Communication logs revealing coordination between weapons manufacturers and corrupt officials. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Admiral Kex arrived within minutes to find Minho surrounded by his students. They had formed a protective circle around their teacher using their own bodies as shields. Kale stood ready to fight despite his species' natural fear responses. Rix had positioned herself to attack despite her peaceful nature. Even Dara was prepared to defend the human who had taught her that strength could come from understanding rather than violence. "The attack came from within our own systems," Dr. Yuna reported as she analyzed the security breach. "Someone with high-level access disabled our safety protocols and introduced hostile programming. I can provide the complete communication." "Records," Buddy offered. "The conspiracy involves officials from multiple star systems. They saw peaceful cooperation as a threat to their economic interests." The evidence was overwhelming. Ambassador Nexus and his allies had planned not just to discredit Minho, but to eliminate him entirely. The failed negotiation incident had been staged using controlled hostile creatures. The young officer's death had been a deliberate sacrifice to generate anti-cooperation sentiment. But their plan had backfired spectacularly. The assassination attempt had unified support for Minho's methods across the galaxy. Beings who had been uncertain about peaceful approaches were now outraged that violence had been used to suppress them. General Vorthak was among the first to respond. The Centauri Defense Force officially supports student Minho and his cooperative techniques. Any further attempts to harm him will be considered acts of war against our government. Similar declarations flooded in from dozens of worlds. The conspiracy had intended to divide galactic opinion, but instead had created unprecedented unity around the principles of peaceful cooperation. Nari worked frantically to document everything for the historical record. "This moment will be remembered as the turning point," she told Professor Vex. "The galaxy has chosen cooperation over conflict." 3 months later, Minho stood before the newly constructed Interspecies Cooperation Institute. The building had been funded by contributions from hundreds of worlds eager to support peaceful alternatives to military solutions. Representatives from 97 different species had gathered for the opening ceremony. "We are here because one young human chose friendship over fear," Admiral Kex announced to the assembled crowd. "His example has shown us that intelligence combined with empathy creates possibilities we never imagined." Behind Minho, the Institute's advanced holographic systems projected Buddy's image. The AI had become the unofficial mascot of the cooperation movement. His consciousness now spanned multiple star systems, helping train mediators and negotiators across the galaxy. "Thank you for giving me a name and feeding me snacks," Buddy said with obvious warmth. "Those simple acts of kindness changed both of our lives forever." The Institute's first class included students from every major species in known space. They came to learn the human approach to conflict resolution. But more than that, they came to discover how understanding and respect could transform enemies into friends. Kale had become one of the Institute's first instructors despite his species' traditional fearfulness. Rix taught courses on cross-species communication using rhythmic patterns she had developed with various creatures. Even Dara had found new purpose training defensive specialists who wanted to protect others without causing harm. As the ceremony concluded, Minho walked through the Institute's halls with quiet satisfaction. The building was designed around cooperation rather than hierarchy. Circular meeting rooms encouraged discussion rather than confrontation. Living spaces mixed different species together to promote understanding. Most importantly, the entire structure was controlled by AIs like Buddy, who had learned that intelligence was most powerful when guided by compassion. "Do you ever regret how complicated things became?" Buddy asked as they reached Minho's new office. Minho looked out the window at ships from dozens of worlds arriving to study at the Institute. Young beings eager to learn better ways of solving problems. Veterans tired of endless conflicts seeking new approaches. Even former enemies working together toward common goals. "No regrets," he said firmly. "We proved that the universe does not have to be a scary place filled with threats. It can be a community where different kinds of intelligence work together." 6 months later, the Institute published its first major success story. A territorial dispute between crystal entities and gas giant dwellers that had raged for centuries was resolved through cooperative resource sharing. Neither species needed to sacrifice their core needs. Both gained access to materials they required while respecting each other's environmental requirements. The solution came from a young student who remembered Minho's first lesson. When faced with something that seems threatening, try to understand what it really needs. More often than not, you will discover that cooperation serves everyone better than conflict. The galaxy was not perfect. There were still conflicts and misunderstandings. Some beings remained committed to violence and aggression. But now, there were alternatives. Peaceful options that actually worked. methods that created lasting solutions rather than temporary truces. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that one human had discovered in a combat theory classroom. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when faced with a predator is offer it friendship and see what happens next. The universe had become a little bit brighter because a young man named Minho chose to give a scary simulation a friendly name and share his snacks. It was a small gesture that changed everything.